Hi, my name is Carla. I am a registered nurse, and today we are going to be looking at how to replace fluid loss by adjusting the IV flow rate. So when we look at this question, I see that a doctor prescribes an IV hourly flow rate adjustment for a post-op abdominal surgery patient based on an output of every 4 hours. The patient is currently receiving dextrose 5% and 0.45% sodium chloride at a rate of 150 milliliters per hour. If from 0800 to 1200 the NG tube output was 480 milliliters, at what rate in milliliters per hour should the nurse replace the fluid loss at 1200? There are so many numbers here, and hopefully you're not panicking on me. So first of all, what am I trying to solve? Well, I'm trying to figure out my new rate in milliliters per hour. How do I figure out this rate? Well, I have to remember the rule that comes with fluid loss replacement. Well, the rule with fluid loss replacement is that you have to replace milliliter per milliliter over the same time span. So when we look at this question, my patient has lost 480 milliliters, and my doctor says that I have to replace this every 4 hours. Essentially, if I go by that milliliter per milliliter over that same time span, I know that over the next 4 hours, I have to give 480 milliliters. So what I am going to do first is I'm going to figure out how many milliliters per hour that means. So 480 milliliters divided by 4 hours, and that gives me 120 milliliters per hour. But this isn't my answer. All of this is telling me is how much I need to replace for this patient every hour. So every hour I need to give 120 milliliters so that I can make up for those 480 milliliters that they lost. So my final answer is actually going to be the addition of these 120 milliliters to the initial rate that my patient was getting, and their initial rate was 150 milliliters. So if they were getting 150 milliliters per hour, and now I have to give 120 milliliters per hour for that fluid loss replacement, my patient's new rate is going to be 270 milliliters per hour, and that is my final answer, 270 milliliters per hour. Let's look at a similar question. So let's scroll down here. So this question is the same. It's going to be a fluid loss replacement question. It's worded a little bit differently, but essentially we are going to do the same thing. We are going to replace a milliliter per milliliter, that same amount that the patient lost, over that same time span. So let's look at the question. It says that a doctor prescribes an IV hourly flow rate adjustment to replace fluid loss every 4 hours for a patient with a nasogastric tube, an NG tube. The patient is currently receiving lactated ringers, LR, at a rate of 100 milliliters per hour. The total NG tube output from 0800 to 1200 was 360 milliliters. At 1200, the nurse should adjust the new rate of LR, lactated ringers, to how many milliliters per hour? Round to a whole number. So let me just double check with that last question. Did it say round to a whole number? It did. Okay. So always make sure, like I skipped this time, but always make sure you always go back to the question and you make sure that you answer the entirety of the question. So round to a whole number, we had a whole number. So I'm not too concerned. Let's go back down to the other question. So with this question, I'm going to look first at how much my patient has lost. So they have lost 360 milliliters. And again, my doctor's order says that every 4 hours I need to replace that. Again, I need to replace 360 milliliters for this patient over the next 4 hours. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to divide those 360 milliliters by those 4 hours. And that should equal 90 milliliters per hour. But this is not my answer. Again, this is only telling me how much fluid loss, the new IV flow rate based off of the fluid loss. But my patient already had fluid going. They had lactated ringers, and it was going at 100 milliliters per hour. So again, what I am going to do is now I'm going to give the initial rate, those 100 milliliters per hour, plus my replacement, which is that 90 milliliters per hour, and this is my final answer. So for this patient, over the next 4 hours, I have to give 190 milliliters per hour. These are the kinds of questions that you're going to encounter on the HESI. If you are struggling with these questions and or other questions that you might find on the HESI, make sure that you check out my other videos.